Okay, so as you know, you have 25 minutes for your presentation, 5 minutes for questions. I'm guessing those other two students will come in here shortly. They probably weren't ready for that time adjustments. And if it's more than Fritz and me, we will either we'll just say our questions out loud, or there might be some people typing questions into the chat. So take a look there.
Okay.
And go ahead and start whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, I'll just get right to it then. I'm highly caffeinated, ready for action. So my name's Evan Sutton. Of course, I'm with Penn State's Master of Geographic Information Systems program. Today, I'm going to be submitting a proposal for remote sensing, specifically the survey of nearshore habitat in the Florida Keys using unmanned aerial vehicle-based bathymetric structure from motion photogrammetry. So before I go any farther, just a brief bit of background on myself. I'm an active duty member of the U.S. Coast Guard. I'm stationed here in Key West as a search and rescue and law enforcement operations controller. I also volunteer with the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary in my free time, what limited I have as a geospatial technician, basically assisting with basic mapping, public education, outreach, media, that sort of thing. However, I am going to be shifting my focus more towards remote sensing applications. So this shift in focus is actually the basis for my capstone proposal. Managers at the sanctuary require higher resolution and more comprehensive remote sensing data sets, which I hope to find a means to provide. As an agenda, of course, I'll be reviewing the background of the Florida Keys and the National Marine Sanctuary. I think context is important. I'll be discussing objectives, reviewing methodology, proposing a project timeline, and fielding any questions. Of course, also discussing anticipated products. So as far as the Florida Keys, it is a 220-mile-long archipelago in South Florida. It's comprised of approximately 1,700 Pleistocene-era limestone islands. So pretty much this is ancient coral, sandbars, mixed for some really rough terrain. It's characterized by mangroves, lagoons, saltwater marshes, corals, sponges, and seagrass. Notable species, marine mammals, you've got manatees, sea turtles, spiny lobsters, and whales. On a fun note, it's also got a rich history of piracy, smuggling, fishing, and maritime trade. The sanctuary itself is the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. It encompasses basically the entirety of the Florida Keys. It was established in 1990. It was built on previous management structures, 4 or 5 different sanctuaries, parks, so on and so forth. It protects approximately 2,900 square miles of nearshore and ocean habitat, stretching from Miami to Dry Tortugas National Park. It also borders the Everglades National Park. Sanctuary prohibits any activity that alters seafloor or threatens natural resources within. It's got about 160 to 200 square miles of coral barrier reef, about 1,000 square miles of seagrass, and about 1,400 square miles of hard bottom habitat. I'm going to say that a couple times throughout this. Hard bottom habitat, that's basically sponges, soft corals, submerged aquatic vegetation, those sorts of things. The Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary also includes the only coral barrier reef in the contiguous United States, the Florida Reef Tract. This is about 300 miles long, extending north of Miami down to Dry Tortugas. It's about 4 miles wide at its widest, and it's also the 3rd largest barrier reef in the world. The corals there are about 5,000 to 7,000 years old. So what that looks like, these are actually the sanctuary boundaries. You can see it stretching from pretty much Miami out to Dry Tortugas in the west. Those smaller boxes there are what's called sanctuary preservation areas. These are very special management areas that are ecologically and scientifically important for natural resource concerns, endangered species, scientific study, you name it. As far as concerns with the sanctuary, they're facing a variety of stressors that drive a need for additional research, monitoring, and restoration. This includes overfishing, pollution, stony coral tissue disease, and physical disturbance by vessel groundings, and just use by the number of tourists who visit the area. There's no single cause for the habitat loss. It's obviously a combined effort. Problem is over the last 4 decades, there's been a 90% decrease in corals. There's been over 4,000 groundings. The sanctuary is getting beaten apart, hence the need for monitoring, research, and remote sensing capabilities. So this brings me to my actual needs for research. So sanctuary scientists and National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration officials admit that they're relatively blind in the nearshore environment, lacking the proper tools to quickly inventory, map, and monitor resources in a highly dynamic area. The sanctuary itself is no exception. They've got smaller data sets that are collected via dive or small boat operations. These are obviously new data sets. They're readily available. This is pretty much the day-to-day activity of the sanctuary. Problem is larger data sets, those collected via side scan sonar, overflight, other forms of remote sensing, they can be a decade or more older or at lower resolutions. In some cases, the best site imagery that's available is sourced from Google Maps, and bathymetric data can go back as far as 2 or 3 decades, the last time it was hit by side scan sonar. Resource constraints prohibit the timely acquisition of new data, particularly at a frequency that the sanctuary scientists would appreciate. This is both operational and financial. NOAA only has so many aircraft that they can spare throughout the agency. There's a high demand. So there's a lot of coordination that goes just into getting overflight. On top of that, it's just expensive. It's expensive to fly, photogrammetric missions. So for the sanctuary, that's a challenge. These data help with benthic mapping of shallow areas, coral area reef monitoring, habitat injury assessment, derelict vessel assessment, as well as post-hurricane damage assessment. The core of this proposal is essentially, I believe that bathymetric structure from motion photogrammetry via UAVs can provide a suitable alternative for those sanctuary scientists and meet their data demands. So as far as the actual proposal and its objectives, I'm proposing to develop a proof of concept for the employment of unmanned aerial vehicle-based bathymetric structure from motion photogrammetry. I will prepare a concept of operations for UAV surveys in the Keys, survey 2 sanctuary preservation areas identified by the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary to demonstrate technological capabilities. I'll compare my results, to existing bathymetric data and species composition data acquired from previous studies. There's actually a really unique structure from motion survey that was done by the U.S. Geological Survey about 2 years ago that I want to use. And if successful, I want to generate a standard operating procedure for future surveys by sanctuary staff. As far as getting into the actual specifics of bathymetric structure from motion photogrammetry, it combines traditional photogrammetry and computer vision algorithms. I know that everyone's familiar with terrestrial UAV survey photogrammetry. I know structure from motion itself is becoming fairly popular since, I think, 2017. Applying it to the marine environment, it's kind of a unique field and a unique challenge. Basically, you can generate hyperscale 3D models and ortho imagery that essentially you can correct for light as it passes through water and get just really finite, good bathymetric data. Again, it's deployable from UAVs, unmanned submersible vehicles, towed surface vehicles. It's affordable, it's accessible, it's deployable. You could even technically use your smartphone for structure from motion photogrammetry, which obviously I won't be doing, but I just want to demonstrate how accessible it is. Its accuracy is scalable through the quality of the system at your disposal. So of course, a survey grade system with PPK or RTK technology and a fine camera, you're going to give a great product out of that. However, theoretically, you could also achieve an excellent product using just a commercial grade system. Your products include a digital elevation model, surface model, terrain models, you name it, ortho imagery, and texturized mesh. And that's really the key product that I'm interested in. So these meshes can be high quality enough and of sufficient resolution that you can actually get down to the scale of millimeters. Now, obviously, I'm going to be surveying from the air with the UAV. I don't think I'm going to get millimeter resolution. I'll probably be looking at something more in the meter range. All the same, I still think that this product can help generate something that's of sufficient benefit to the sanctuary. So again, just to really drive this home, it combines traditional photogrammetry and computer vision. Of course, we're dealing with all the same parameters: interior and exterior orientation, overlap, side lap, ground sampling distance, georeferencing, network geometry, all the same stuff that we do from normal photogrammetry. The key to bathymetric structure from motion photogrammetry lies in the algorithms that are employed, specifically the Dietrich algorithm. So pretty much these algorithms, they correlate images, they compute exterior and interior orientation for your actual images itself and the camera. It permits direct georeferencing. So in other words, you can georeference without ground control points if you've got a high enough survey grade system. But most importantly, as I alluded to earlier, it corrects for the refraction of light as it passes through the water. I'm going to call that the air-water interface. This permits the accurate assessment of depth and the creation of an accurate texturized mesh. Without that algorithm, you're going to be having estimations of depth that are, frankly, more shallow. It's called the perceived point. It's going to be shallower and just full of error. So that this corrects for that. Working to my favor, of course, Fort Keys is an optimal environment for this process. Basically, within the marine environment, you want high water clarity, low wave action, few breaking waves, highly texturized bottom surface, and low tidal amplitude. Fort Keys fits this to a T. As you can see here, I've got a nice photo of alligator reef light, which is it's along the reef line, but this is characteristic of the type of area that I'm looking to survey. In terms of best practices, I can also employ some of these to get a higher quality product, to include pre-calibrating my camera on land. This process includes an obscene amount of overlap and side lap, but the point of that is to be able to image every point from at least 3 angles. And this permits kind of that direct georeferencing and depth estimation. You can fly at higher altitudes to reduce specular glare and other issues with light scattering across the water. And then, of course, you can employ a single ground control point to reduce positional error. So when using commercial grade products, your standard terrestrial structure for motion, it actually performs pretty admirably without ground control points. This process does less so. And again, that's with a commercial grade system. So this is going to be a challenge that I have to contend with and that I'm still negotiating with the sanctuary for. We can always install ground control points via snorkeling basically prior to a survey, but there's going to be a little bit of logistics that go into that. Getting more into, again, the specifics of this proposal in terms of hardware, I'm actually eyeballing two different systems because these are organic or at least in reach for the sanctuary. The first is the DJI Mavic Pro 3. This is organic to the sanctuary itself. It's a commercial grade system. It's got a great camera, decent positional accuracy, and it's got excellent range and endurance. This is actually operated by a volunteer in the sanctuary. And if that falls through, I can also get one myself for a reasonable price. The one that I really want to use is the DJI Matrice 2010 RTK. This is operated by the National Center for Coastal Ocean Science. They probably even have a better system at their disposal, but this is what I know exists. It's a survey grade system, high resolution imagery, high positional accuracy with decent endurance. Ultimately, if I get my hands on this system, I think we're going to get a really solid high resolution product. In terms of software, pretty much basic mission planning software, ArcGIS Pro to characterize the survey area, Mission Planner to do the mission planning, and Agisoft Metashape, another variety of different photogrammetric programs like Pix4D, but this product seems to work the best. It's not specifically endorsed by NOAA, but it's definitely used a lot. So I think I'll probably stick to that. The one thing I will have to get my hands on are the actual algorithms that permit this process to go. That includes the Dietrich algorithm. You just get that via GitHub. It's open source. It's not going to be difficult. As far as the survey sites, so I've got that red circle there. That is the area that I intend to operate. On the right are the actual sites, Newfound Harbor and Looe Key. Again, these are sanctuary preservation areas. For Newfound Harbor, this is only about a mile offshore. It's unique in that it's the only bit of inshore patch reef inside the sanctuary, so it's of high interest to the scientists. It's only about 80 acres wide or in size. Water clarity there is variable, but it's good on a good day. Groundings are also common, so there's also a damage element where they want to be able to survey repeatedly to track damage over time. It's also in Class D airspace, which works for me because it means I can fly a drone there. The second survey site is Looe Key. So this is 5.5 nautical miles offshore from the Middle Keys. It's shallow coral barrier reef. It's about 400 acres in size, a little larger. I'm going to defer to the scientists as far as which, obviously it's split in two. I'm going to defer to them as far as which one they want to survey first. Again, Class D airspace. What's unique about this area is it was actually previously mapped using the structure from motion quantitative underwater imaging device with 5 cameras, courtesy of the U.S. Geological Survey. This is a towed surface vehicle, high resolution. I want to use this data as my baseline to compare the products that I generate with. Effectively, I can do an accuracy assessment that way. The trick with this system is it's one of a kind and it's hard to deploy. So again, this is why I'm trying to leverage UAVs. It's just going to be easier temporally, deployability, you name it. So as far as timeline and products, this is in flux. Obviously, the products I want to generate concept of operations, get out there, collect my data, get the ortho imagery, get the texturized meshes, get, the digital elevation models, you name it. I want to do that comparative analysis, and then I want to generate a standard operating procedure that, the sanctuary can use in the future. Because my hope is that once all this is said and done, and, year or two time, however long it takes, we can begin routine UAV surveys. As far as the timeline, I'm going to be leveraging this summer to do the concept of operations and mission planning. Again, this is a back and forth discussion with NOAA. I actually have a meeting with them, I think on the 14th, with a couple of different offices and maybe even the U.S. Geological Survey. It'd be great to shoot for a September 2022 site survey, complete the data analysis by October, and then deliver results by November. This might be an aggressive timeline, I got to be honest, but I'll be adaptable. Complicating things, of course, are an impending transfer across the country and the current operations I'm engaged in right now for my actual job. Ultimately, in summary, persistent gaps in nearshore data complicates natural resource management in the Florida Keys. I'm trying to remediate that with a UAV-based photogrammetry, structure from motion photogrammetry. I think it's going to be innovative, and I think it's going to acquire. I think it'll be capable of acquiring the data and the products that they need, and it'll at least be useful to help them better manage the sanctuary. At the end of the day, I'm hoping this will act as a proof of concept for this process or this technique's applicability in the Florida Keys. Appreciate everyone's time. Special shout out to Dr. Marvin May and Lisa Simons, of course. She is my contact at the sanctuary. I have just a quick list of acronyms that we can study real fast because I threw a lot of acronyms in there. And then, of course, my citations. At this point, I'll open up the floor to questions. Bear with me. I'm going to see if I can actually find the questions.
Well, there's none in the chat yet. And since there's just a few of us and Matt just entered, then maybe Fritz and I will both ask ours out loud. And I'm hoping we'll ask questions until the next presenter comes into the room. But I have a lot. It was such an interesting presentation. So many beautiful pictures and slides and maps. And so I'll ask first, then I'll let Fritz go, and then I'll ask some more after him. I was just first wondering how much of what you just talked about is completely new to the sanctuary. I mean, are they doing any sort of?
So it's all brand new. They have that volunteer who operates a Mavic Pro 3. They do a very unstructured survey. I say unstructured in that, let's say there's a grounding of a sailboat or something like that, or a derelict boat they want to take a look at. That individual will go out and fly for it, but nothing that he collects is necessarily survey grade. You're not making measurements. You're not making any kind of geospatial product from it. It's basically to say, okay, here's the problem. And that's pretty much it. Otherwise, the sanctuary hasn't employed these kinds of tools. I think the Squid 5 was really their first foray into structure from motion, and it proved to be very successful. Like, again, it's about accessibility. And to me, if I can, I want the survey grade system to go through. I know that the commercial grade system, the Mavic Pro 3, is going to be always there. And I'd almost rather just see if that meets the need. I'm worried that it's not. They do want as highly positionally accurate data as possible, specifically for coral monitoring. So, like I said, at the bare minimum here, what I'm trying to show is like, okay, this works for the Florida Keys. We know it works in other areas. They've used it in the Pacific. They've used it down in St. Croix, but I want to show the Keys is a good fit too.
Great. Fritz, do you have questions?
Yeah. I'd love to come down and just hang out, I don't know. So you mentioned a lot about various kinds of accuracies with your data collection. I was curious to know, it seems to me one of the pertinent things would be the vertical datum of choice. Have you considered how are you going to define that?
Well, so that brings up an interesting point too. So for some of these sanctuary preservation areas, they have set stations there. So pretty much the USGS's vertical datum, the stations used to build that. You can also use those as ground control points, which I'll happily do because that position is precisely known. Otherwise, right now I'm deferring. I want to use the Squid 5 data as pretty much the baseline. It was of sufficient resolution, high enough quality. I want to compare everything to that pretty much.
So
I
is,
don't think it's sorry, I was going to say, I don't think it's a great answer for you. Unfortunately, again, I mean, looking at my charts, looking at the bathymetric data available, a lot of this stuff is honestly really old. So without specific site surveys and whatnot, I think it's going to be a crapshoot, frankly.
well, I assume that any older data that you'd have would be tied to like NGVD 29 or a local tidal datum, something like mean low water. I didn't know, if you're wanting to take this data and tap into a larger vertical datum of the United States, then something like NAVD 88 would be okay. But then realize that I think 2025 NAVD 88 is going to go away, and they're replacing it with a new vertical datum for elevation or heighting.
Right.
So again, I didn't know, your USGS control benchmarks that are out there somewhere. All those are tied to NGVD 29. Some of them may have been updated at NAVD 88, but with the new datum that they're proposing, the benchmarks aren't a factor.
They're not going to be relevant.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
I mean, you can tie into them, but it's not going to be accurate.
Okay.
And then given with sea level change, the new datum is probably the way to go, but it's not released yet, so you can't actually use it.
Well, that's why I'm hoping to tie in with USGS, honestly, and the other offices in NOAA. There's a lot of study down here. I like the Florida Keys. It's a great place. I'd buy a home if I could afford it, but I tell you what, it's going to be underwater in about 30 years. So there's a lot of research that's going into it. I think that's probably an area of investigation that I need to dive deeper into, honestly, is again, it's the quantitative, it's the actual comparison element. I've got ideas, but at the end of the day, for something that's, scientifically useful, it needs to be fleshed out a little more.
Well, I think the question that you should keep in mind is what's the geographic scale at which this is going to be used? Is it purely local, or is it going to tie into something national? If it's local, then you literally could set your own datum origin because no one else would use it.
Right. And I think that's probably closer to my intent for right now, is to keep it sanctuary specific, because again, they have something like 30, 35 management areas. I think if I remember the number off the top of my head. So like, I don't want to fly necessarily a UAV down the entire reef line, although that'd be great. But I would like eventually for this product to be able to be used at each sanctuary preservation or research area. And those are very small, you're talking 400 acres pretty much. That's fairly consistent with the largest.
I liked the idea. I liked the idea of adding the control points by snorkeling. It just sounds so interesting, and it sounds like Fritz is volunteering to do that. So
yeah,
if you needed to do that,
get my
I'll
skivvies
take all the
on
help
and
I
come
can
down and
get.
join you.
And then I was just curious, you were saying you're moving to Alaska. How does that affect you working on this project? I mean, I know you have other people who can be helping to finish it up or whatever. And then I guess along with that, is there anything in Alaska where you're going where you can apply the same thing? Are you going to be doing any kind of similar projects?
Sort of. So I'll answer first logistically what I'm going to need for this project. So I am transferring to Alaska at the end of June. I hope to get out and complete at least, like, best case scenario, you could do like one trial run. I'm not talking anything like super accurate or whatever, but basically say, okay, hey, this works. This is what this looked like. If I can get with the scientists and get with the volunteers, the sanctuary actually has a pretty good remote working system. They've got people who work consistently in Seattle. So in terms of sharing data and whatnot, everyone's comfortable that I could work in Juneau where I'm going and just have field technicians essentially actually execute the products that I'm pushing out, take the products back, do the analysis, pretty much that back and forth tempo. As far as your second question, can I apply this to Juneau where I'm headed? I can't speak to the resource management side. I'll speak from a Coast Guard side. Juneau is similar to the Keys in that it's hyper remote. We've got a lot of nooks and crannies. It's difficult to get resources out there, difficult for overflights. The job I'm going to be specifically working on is best summarized as Arctic oil spill control. I think UAVs, and the Coast Guard would agree with me, have an exceptional application or potential rather for oil spill response. And they're currently testing that right now. So I can kind of tie that in. Now, I don't know if they're going to care about bathymetric data, let's say, but at least for a proof of concept, again, I think you could, they're loose ties is what I'm saying.
Great. Wow, from one interesting place to another. How long will you be in Alaska?
4 years for right now. I've been here for 3 years, and then I'll be up there for 4 years. It's going to be a good job. Get to transfer or travel all around Alaska. So I'm excited.
Wow, sounds very exciting. Okay, so Dan just said that he is checking to see if Brittany's coming in soon. First, do you have any other questions for Evan?
No, that was just the vertical with the horizontal control is something else you're going to have to, and again, it's the same situation. Right now, NAD 83 is the predominant official government horizontal datum. You may encounter some NAD 27 artifacts lingering down there, but a new datum is set to replace NAD 83. And it's not there yet. But this gets back to the idea of, if you're going to be just doing this on a local scale, yeah, you can set anything really to be your zero and then operate from there. The problem would be then is if you did want to take this and make it applicable or, scalable to something national or statewide, and that's hard to do.
Okay.
Not so much in the vertical because you're just dealing with a one-dimensional transformation, but a horizontal transformation from an arbitrary origin to a NAD 83 or something like that could be potentially challenging from a mathematical standpoint.
No, like I said, that's a fair point, and that will warrant further investigation, certainly on my end. So, yeah, first, as far as the quantitative and qualitative too, that I need to dig in a little more. It's been an interesting few months for me. So,
Well, thanks again, Evan. That was a really great presentation.
appreciate your time.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if the person who's in here as Matt, maybe that is Brittany.
That's Brittany, yeah.
Okay, great. So it looks like Brittany is in the room. So Brittany, whenever you're ready to start sharing your presentation, you can go ahead and get started.
Sorry, yeah, I don't know why it switched to Matt. That's my husband, so. Let me share. One moment.
No problem.
I'm in the geodesign program and I am completing my capstone project. This geodesign study will look at Clifton, Colorado to determine a multimodal transportation system that can be naturally integrated into the existing land use. And can everyone see that okay? Great.
Yep, we can.
The state of Colorado, shown here, is classified as one of the mountain states and is home to the Rocky Mountains. Colorado is known for its landscapes, wildlife, and the variety of recreational activities from mountain biking to skiing, and its famous forests, mountains, mesas, and hot springs. The Uncompahgre Plateau and the Grand Mesa are the county's dominant landforms. The Grand Valley is a broad, fertile valley and floodplain carved by the Colorado and Gunnison rivers. The canyon lands of the Dolores River are to the southwest, and the Grand Mesa is carved by a series of ancient lava flows. The land that we now know as Mesa County was created by numerous advances and retreats of seas, deserts and dunes, lava flows, lush forests, and rivers with broad floodplains. Clifton is located in the heart of the Grand Valley within Mesa County, and its name suggests it is a landscape filled with distinct mesas, plateaus, and valleys that were shaped throughout geological time. Grand Junction is 7 miles to the west and Palisades 6 miles to the east of Clifton. The Clifton area is one out of 8 unincorporated counties within the Mesa County District, which translates to the area not having a common social identity, municipal organization, or official political designation, but it is considered a consensus designated place. That means that the concentration of population is identified by the US Census Bureau for statistical purposes. Clifton, named for its proximity to the Book Cliffs, was assigned that name by railroad survey crews as early as 1882 due to the characteristic shape of the cliff. It resembles the edge of a bound book. Mesa County is in a river valley surrounded by contrasting natural landmarks such as the Colorado National Monument. Unfortunately, Clifton does not fit cohesively with the natural beauty that surrounds this community. And in most cases, it does not fit with the surrounding communities, that is Grand Junction and Palisade. So it is therefore excluded from most tourism maps. However, Clifton is strategically located along I-70 and State Highway 141. And as shown in this picture, it leads travelers towards Utah or Denver as well. This area presents numerous opportunities and challenges for the economic and business development as the community grows and provides similar amenities as neighboring communities, that is Grand Junction and Palisade. The multimodal transportation plan will cover the highlighted areas as this is the central hub for travel, residential areas, and mixed use areas like restaurants, financial services, and bus transportation. The main purpose of this project is to design a multimodal transit-oriented community that aids in mobility and connectivity to the land while lowering carbon emissions to promote the quality of life. This study will assist in public action and economic profit for the Clifton area to ensure that future development drives the area to be successful through means of community support. Early years of growth in the Clifton community were fueled by the strong agricultural base of the community. There were 10,000 acres of fruit in the first decade of the century, with Cross Orchards being the largest operation in that area. The community prospered in the early 1900s until a moth infestation and seepage destroyed apple and pear orchards in the area in the 1920s. Many orchards have disappeared during the past 2 decades as the Clifton area in general has been heavily subdivided for residential development. The structures in outlying areas have been surrounded by new residential development, and many areas have been lost as the former agricultural properties have developed. In the downtown area, the historic sites and structures are a mix of residential and commercial buildings. Currently, Mesa County has not yet adopted a local register of historic sites, structures, and districts, but there are 2 properties listed in the National Register of Historic Places. There are many other historic buildings in the area, but have not been added to the National Register. Clifton and Grand Junction have the highest number of households, but Clifton has the lowest median household income, with 26.1% of the residents living below the poverty level. The community is an older age group. Much of the residential growth is taking place in unincorporated areas of the Grand Valley, placing increased demands for urban services on county departments and requiring the extension of the infrastructure to rural areas. Currently, the economic base of the planning area is a narrow mix of basic and non-basic industries. The strongest sector of the economy is the service sector, while the least robust sector of the economy is manufacturing. The largest declining sector is finance, insurance, and real estate. The study area is constructed on various land uses of industrial, commercial, agriculture, and residential development. The study area would benefit greatly by integrating the multimodal transportation system with future demands of economic growth. Mixed-use areas are centers where high-density development, redevelopment, and/or a broader spectrum of land uses are encouraged. Mixed-use areas located at or near interchanges and the intersections of Mayo thoroughfares are intended to maximize the economic development potential of these areas by providing areas primarily for intensive commercial, office, and limited industrial purposes. Mixed-use areas are intended to provide flexibility in design and land uses in order to protect and enhance the character of the area. Moderate to high density residential uses could be encouraged in mixed use areas where such development would complement and be harmonious with existing and potential development. Mixed use areas are intended for and depend on high density and concentrated areas of activity. Pedestrian-oriented circulation, linkages, and trails are an essential design element of mixed-use developments. The human interaction and proximity to concentrated activities is what makes the mixed use successful and would be a critical development in correlation with the multimodal transportation design plan for Clifton. The Clifton community is served by roads built for rural standards. Many of these roads do not have pedestrian facilities. Thus, the need to identify and prioritize safety, capacity, and improvements for transit, bicycle, and pedestrian facilities. This plan identifies the need for new bicycle and trail facilities at various locations within the study area to ensure open circulation for all residents to utilize. Much of the land development in the Clifton area does not promote bike and pedestrian types of travel. Many of the subdivisions feature cul-de-sacs and dead-end streets, which may create situations where a long winding trip is required to cover a short straight line distance. Constructing a usable network of pedestrian facilities that meets the needs of residents, connecting residents to either transit type destinations such as bus stops or to an end destination such as a school would be highly beneficial, as this would create connections and establish a sense of place for Clifton residents. The Clifton Community Transit System inventory consists of 80 bus stops, a combination of signed stops, benches, and shelters. These stops provide Clifton residents access to Grand Valley Transit and therefore the location represents an important aspect of this study. However, over half of the reported stops do not have accessible sidewalks or other means to access the stop. Some additional existing physical conditions within the area is the Colorado River floodplain. In Mesa County, the flood regulatory area is a portion of the floodplain that is subject to inundation by the 100-year flood. The floodway district is that portion of the designated floodplain which is required to carry and discharge a 100-year flood without cumulatively increasing the water surface elevation more than 1 foot at any point. The flood fringe is the area other than the stream channel and floodway, which occupies the remainder of the 100-year floodplain and receives shallower waters and lower velocities as defined by the Federal Emergency Management Agency on the Colorado River. Generally, the purpose of the floodplain regulations is to promote the public health, safety, and general welfare, and to minimize public and private losses due to flood conditions in specific areas. Most of the Clifton community is located within the watershed drainage basin known as Douglas Wash. The basin encompasses a large area and is made up of 2 subbasins, the eastern and western Douglas Wash branches. The basin is generally defined by the southern edge of the Book Cliffs rim and extends all the way to the Colorado River. Due to the study area being developed with a mix of industrial, commercial, agricultural, and residential development, many facilities along the I-70 business loop utilize hazardous materials that can have a negative impact on the study area. 19 facilities were evaluated and contain hazardous materials such as petroleum, hydrocarbon use, fueling station operations, historical landfills, leaking underground storage tanks, material storage practices, and facilities containing liquefied petroleum gas. The identified areas shown here are of major concern due to the high level of safety that is placed on the future development of the multimodal transportation system. We want to ensure the well-being of Clifton residents by identifying hazardous areas and ensuring that the transportation plan will provide healthy and safe modes of transport. The metrics shown here will aid in the planning process and encompass the needs for a multimodal transportation system in Clifton, Colorado. To achieve these metrics, I will be using programs such as ArcPro, GeoPlanner, City Engine, and ArcUrban to test how the functionality of the transport system will serve the residents in a direct and positive means. The stakeholders are an important step toward providing community-wide acceptable recommendations by involving key groups of individuals. The Colorado Department of Transportation, Grand Valley Transit, and residents of Clifton will be the driving factor for necessary changes to be made within the study area. Communication from these groups is key, so all changes required for a multimodal transportation system will be successful and maintain the goals set forth in this plan, such as improve mobility and reduce congestion, improve corridor and intersection operations, improve multimodal facilities, and most importantly, improve safety for all users. The multimodal transportation design will be a comprehensive 23-year plan. Due to the large amount of development work to correct and improve upon roadways for bus transit, bus stops, sidewalks, and trails, the plan will be completed in 2045. The geodesign team will have ample time to create workshops so that residents can voice their concerns and opinions about the project design. This will ensure that the viewpoints and needs of the Clifton residents are integrated into the design plan to create the sense of place many residents desire. Mesa County's climate, topography, and large percentage of public lands all make the region ideal for the development of a very complete transportation system. This would have significant economic, health, recreation, and transportation benefits. The private vehicle remains the #1 choice of transportation in the region, yet the recreational, commute, and economic impact benefits of bicycling on the region are undeniable. A well-planned transportation system moves traffic efficiently, but also encourages people to park and walk around downtown areas, shopping and business areas, provides for safe crossings, and encourages people to get out of their cars and walk and ride bicycles to and from locations. Clifton residents expressed a need for a more walkable community with lighted walks and the need to clean up several properties that hurt the Clifton image. The need for new development such as retail, business, and residential was also requested. This development must have a level of quality that promotes a more positive image and yet respects the history and character of Clifton. Most importantly, we want Clifton to be added to the map so it cohesively fits with the landscape and surrounding communities. Thank you.
Great job, Brittany. If anybody has any questions, you can either unmute yourself and ask the question or type it into the chat.
A question, Brittany. Hello.
Hello.
Nice overview on your whole project. It is a pretty ambitious project. You're already planning on the long-term plan on it. You've mentioned a couple things on sense of place and other things and other values of what Clifton needs. Are you going to assess those values or try to assess what their needs are? For example, you mentioned in the last conclusion there, you said clean up developments that hurt Clifton's image. What is the image that you're trying to achieve? And I guess how are you identifying that image?
I actually live in Clifton, so I know personally what this area looks like. The image that people are talking about is not having a cohesive design for the entirety of residential areas. The surrounding businesses have the same looks on the outside, so the facades are all the same. They have the same design plans, but the residential areas lack that planning design. And so it really brings down the home values and also what people kind of think of as Clifton, which is rundown and just not a very appealing and aesthetically pleasing place to look at.
Okay.
So I'll jump in here. As with any sort of planning operation, one has to ask, where are the funds going to come from to make all this happen? Is that I know that's not really part of your plan here, but ultimately someone's got to pay for it, right? So have you thought about how it's going to get completed?
I did a little bit of research on that. I found out that small communities such as Clifton would more than likely need to gain their finances through maybe private people, communities such as that. But I don't think that in any way would Grand Junction or Palisade have any money going into Clifton. So it would definitely have to be something that I research further to figure out what type of entities here in Clifton can provide those type of finances. But yeah, I don't really have a good answer for you for that one.
I know based on previous associations with people I've known and other transportation related municipality departments, state agencies and federal agencies often have grants for various kinds of capital improvement projects. And, you know, from what I've seen of your work here, I think a little investigation on those lines would probably prove pretty beneficial. Probably wouldn't cover all of it, but it'd be a chunk of change that you could apply towards, you know, maybe prioritizing some of what you'd like to get accomplished.
Okay, thank you.
Rich, you bring up a good point. When you do identify a grant that handles something like this small town growth, transit oriented developments, there's going to be a number of priorities for that grant's mission. And that can then change and prioritize your project, hopefully actually narrowing your scope of your project to be probably more manageable, but it's targeting that program.
Yeah. Hey, Brittany, I think that was great. Well done. I think, I guess, do you have any, are there any major concerns that you're worried about for the next phase, or what are your, you know, pain points or that kind of thing that you're not too sure about going forward?
Definitely the financial was one of them. Also, maybe not being able to gain the finances to actually complete a plan in the desired amount of time. That could always, you know, problems can arise, and I might fall into that trap of not being able to hit that mark. So if this was to really like be a plan that the city would kind of take over. So that's one thing. Another thing is possibly gaining the necessary info from community members. Sometimes, especially out here, a lot of the people travel to Grand Junction to work. And so I might find myself in a complicated position of trying to get people to talk about where they live and also meet that time when they're going to be home. So that way I can kind of accomplish that. So I know how they want their community to look and what they would like within the community.
Okay, great job, Brittany.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will move along to Miles Druce. Miles, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and share your screen and go ahead and start talking.
Okay, awesome. 1 second. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Oh, is it sharing the right?
I'm not sure if it's in slideshow mode.
Yeah, sorry, I have multiple monitors. I'll have to just unshare and
No problem.
share it on this screen instead. Okay, all set?
Yep.
Okay, so my geodesign capstone is called Reforming Rochester, utilizing the geodesign framework to institute green infrastructure in the I-490 corridor. So the site specifically is the I-490 existing highway that cuts through Rochester. So this is a historic transportation route in Rochester. It was actually, as you can see in this image, the original pathway of the Erie Canal cutting through the city of Rochester. And what happened was, as the canal really lost its purpose in terms of transporting goods, it was moved down about 5 miles south And this area was then replaced by a subway. It was not a below ground subway, but a fixed rail above ground. And that lasted from about the 1920s up until the late 1950s, where the rise of the car and the highway in America really took over. And this was transformed into the highway it is now today, known as I-490. And it fed what was called the inner loop, which is now defunct, this central loop surrounding downtown Rochester. And so the main purpose of I-490 was to cut through the geographic and residential center of Rochester. So to get people out from the suburbs into the center of Rochester and vice versa. And its overall connection to other highways connects to I-590, 9390, otherwise known as the outer loop of Rochester. So the reason I chose this project is I'm a resident of Rochester, New York myself. And this project started, the inner loop fill-in project started around the early 2000s, but has really taken hold within the last decade or so. You can see in the image on the right-hand side that this grass and buildings that was once there, that was a sunken highway. And it was that inner loop that surrounded downtown Rochester, and it really had no use, and it was fracturing what was downtown Rochester. So they decided to fill it in and then also modify the existing roadway, this Union Street alongside of it, to provide for multiple uses of transportation. So you can see bike lanes and pedestrian pathway. And so this has been seen as a huge success. So they have so far only transformed a portion of the inner loop thus far, but just a few weeks ago, New York State pledged over $100 million to work on the second portion of their inner loop and to complete that transformation. So by the end of the decade here, roughly 2030, the inner loop will be totally gone. And this has been seen as both a success just in Rochester, but also in the overall, planning and design and urban community. Another inspiration is green infrastructure. I've always had an affinity for that, and what green infrastructure is for those who haven't heard of it is it's utilizing both man-made infrastructure and nature in order to solve urbanism problems and climatic problems and problems with that weather presents and man-made infrastructure presents. So you can see here on this right-hand side, this is also known as a bioswale. So it's using kind of natural defenses to stop things such as runoff. On the left-hand side, using all sorts of different infrastructure techniques to build human development more in line with natural development. So my proposed goal for this corridor is to overall improve the sustainability of the I-490 corridor. So what does that mean? I'm taking two main approaches to that. One approach is for transportation. So I want to bolster the public infrastructure network in the area. So right now, I-490 is used basically only for private use and commercial use, so trucks and things like that. So there's no public infrastructure utilizing this corridor right now. So I would like to utilize this corridor to reduce the commute time for those utilizing public transport. And I'd like to add and improve public infrastructure related appurtenances. So the bus stops that are found in Rochester, many of them are not improved. They don't have any protection from the elements, which, if you know about Rochester, is infamous for the amount of snow and cloudy days it receives in a year. So this is really problematic for those utilizing public infrastructure. I also want to improve the overall transportation options in the area. So I mentioned that really it's only for private use. I want to make it have more options. Nobody's walking on the highway, nobody's biking on the highway. So, and introduce more options and make them more readily available, and then influence increased participation in public transportation. So right now, through the research that I did, people found that if you're utilizing public transportation in Rochester, it's more so because you have to rather than you want to. And so I want to change that public opinion and make it more favorable to be participating in public transportation. The other aspect of this is from an environmental standpoint. So I want to reduce the negative environmental impacts of the I-490 corridor. So I want to minimize the carbon footprint of the area. So minimize the emissions that are coming from these private vehicles and trucks. I also want to reduce things such as the impact of impervious surfaces. So the highway has a problem with flooding and running off into existing waterways. And Rochester has a huge problem with runoff just in general. Actually, one of the waterways, main waterways, the Irondequoit Bay, which feeds into Lake Ontario. It's actually one of the few lakes in which there is now a permanent level of saltwater and freshwater due to the amount of salt that has run off into the waterways. And then also, I want to introduce a number of beneficial green infrastructure practices to the area and improve the overall environmental sustainability of I-490. In terms of starting to go through the framework and looking at what my data needs are. So from a GIS standpoint, I want to utilize GIS analysis and network analysis in order to do things such as look at commute time. So for that, I need parcel data, road centerline data. I want demographic data so I can look at the values of the people and what are the people experiencing in this area. Look at pollution data that's provided for the city and the county. Scientific and quantitative data that I want to look at. So the relationship between transportation and global climate change. What is the average levels of pollution for various types of transportation? And then look at green infrastructure in relationship with pollution. So what types of green infrastructure can reduce what types of pollution? And then I also want to look at build costs related to transportation. So if I want to implement things like new bus stops or any sort of improvement, what is it going to take in order to get those things built? And lastly, I want to look at the values of the people. So one of the important things I mentioned was increasing the public participation and public view of public transportation. So I want to look at, how do people feel about projects like this? So there's luckily a lot of information on how people felt about the Interloop and the public forums that were held there. But I would also want to do a deeper dive into interviews, public forums, and publications to get an idea of what the city of Rochester and their citizens are looking for. So process models, what are current processes in the area? When we look at transportation, what are the current methods of transportation? What's the ridership for these different transportation methods? And then land use. So how is the public right-of-way currently being utilized? What are the transportation related appurtenances that are available? Behavioral, what is the preferred method of transportation? What are the opinions regarding public transportation? Economic processes, what investments in the area are there? How many are related to sustainable transportation? Really at this point with I-490, there's about none. Environmental, what's the current carbon footprint in the area? What runoff is occurring in the area? And then how is pollution tied to these methods of transportation I previously mentioned? Now I want to evaluate these processes and be able to make decisions on where to make changes. So that's going to utilize my GIS-based assessment. So I want to create things like different zones of walkability within the corridor. So how available is it for people to walk within this corridor and get to different places? What are the different zones of commute times based off of utilizing public transportation? Where is there a lack of improved transportation related appurtenances? And I know this personally that there's a lack basically everywhere. And which waterways are being modified with things such as runoff? And then which areas of the right-of-way of the highway are unimproved? There's large grass medians that are currently being unimproved because it would be dangerous for people to be utilizing these areas because of the high speed of vehicles that are going along there. And then from an environmental standpoint, I want to talk about how to make the changes. So what methods of transportation are the biggest carbon polluters? So then therefore, what are the methods of transportation that I want to target in order to reduce the most? And then what's the total carbon footprint of the area? What's the status of the road surface? So what is the road created from, and what its level of drainage, and what sort of appurtenances are there currently for drainage in the area, and how does that system work? And then what is the status of the unimproved areas? So I mentioned those grass areas, what is the slope of these areas? How accessible are they to changing them, and what sort of effort would it take to modify them to reach to different levels of green infrastructure? And then I've talked much about how do people feel about public transportation as a preferred method of transportation or a necessity. Like I said, people find it as a necessity, and I want to be able to target those feelings and be able to change them. So getting into change, I want to create a rule-based change model, and utilizing those evaluations, I want to see what different modes of transportation should I introduce to the area, and how available should I make different modes of transportation. So it doesn't make sense for there to be people walking through there. It doesn't make sense for people to be walking or biking. Does it make sense to introduce fixed rail? Does it make sense to introduce buses, electric buses, all sorts of different modes of transportation, and what makes sense to introduce in those areas? Talking about the nature of the right-of-way, how should I modify the right-of-way? So I can see this chart up here. There's a number of green infrastructure practices, such as introducing tree planting, bioretention, rain gardens, porous pavement. So things such as porous pavement is something that I might be interested in introducing in terms of reducing runoff and reducing noise pollution, for example. Behavioral changes, how can I make the changes of the public perception utilizing incentives and disincentives? So there's a number of cities who've introduced car taxes or high occupancy vehicle only lanes. So looking at some incentives and disincentives and how to change behavior. And then I want to also take into account the inner loop and the effect that that's had in Rochester and the public opinion. And also over the past decade or so, ever since the downfall of Kodak and Xerox, there has been a reinvestment in downtown Rochester. So looking at what are the public opinions of that, and also what is the funds available because of that refocus. And then lastly, New York State transportation funding. So New York State actually, just when they released their budget a few weeks ago, also announced the highest amount of money that they'll ever be spending on transportation and transportation related pertinences. So seeing what sort of funds are available out there. Impact models. So once I make those changes, I want to assess those changes that I made. So what are those new zones of walkability? What are those new zones of commute times? Have I addressed the lack of transportation related pertinences? Have I reduced the amount of runoff that's occurring? Have I reduced the amount of carbon footprint is there? And what are the benefits of the green infrastructure improvements that I've hopefully made to the unimproved areas of the right of way? And then lastly, do the behavioral changes align with the values of people? If I'm going to make these changes and then no one's going to utilize it, that's not a successful project. So I want to make sure that I'm addressing the values of the citizens of Rochester. So then how I make my decision, I talked about these goals, and most of them are quantitatively based. So I want to be able to utilize data in order to say, yes, I have succeeded in this goal. No, I have not succeeded in this goal. But in terms of things like, public viewpoint, those are going to be qualitative. So I have to base that off of existing conversations and ideals that the citizens of Rochester have demonstrated. but mostly I want to use a binary decision model and address my goals on a case-by-case basis and say yes or no. And then once I've answered yes to all of my goals, then I have successfully completed my project. The project deliverables. So I want my final design to look like a green infrastructure guide. So both address the zones within the I-490 corridor, but also address it holistically. So there are going to be suggestions that I'll make that will be specific for the site, but also for the whole corridor to work cohesively. I have to make holistic suggestions for the entire corridor there. So I want to have a guide on how to address the issues, both from a zone standpoint and from an entire network standpoint. My final deliverable hopefully be a story map. I've utilized this many times. I enjoy the kind of interactive narrative and the availability to utilize interactive maps and other forms of media in there. I want to utilize local resources. So I live and work in Rochester, and so I want to utilize as many local resources as I can to achieve this project, and also get the values of the people as best as I can. And then hopefully present it at the spring 2023 JS SIG conference. JS SIG is the Geographic Information Systems Special Interest Group. It is a group that hosts a conference that is related mostly to the Rochester area, but includes 9 counties that mostly start from Rochester and head all the way over to Syracuse, engulfing the Finger Lakes. I've attended this conference in the past, and I think this would be an appropriate conference to present this in. And then my timeline would be to do some additional research and scoping to make sure that I'm asking the questions that I know I can answer and answer efficiently. So do that additional research and scoping this summer. This fall would be going through the geodesign framework and completing my project. And then the spring would be focusing on creating the visuals for my guide and the presentation, and then having the presentation in April. And that's it. Thank you.
Great job, Miles. Does anybody have any questions? You could either unmute and talk out loud or put something in the chat.
Miles, that's good stuff. I was curious, same as Brittany, do you foresee any major challenges or any kind of, what are your biggest concerns going to the next phases?
Yeah, so one of my major concerns, and I've talked to David a lot about this, is it's a federal highway. So in order to make it feasible, I have to align myself with the goals of the federal highway system, and specifically the goals of this highway. So, I can't, like the inner loop, I can't just fill it in. There's too much traffic in there. So I want to be able to be realistic with my goals, while also, and also in terms of build costs. Yes, there is a lot of investment going into Rochester and to New York State, but making sure that the suggestions I have are realistic. And I work in construction, and so I'm somewhat knowledgeable about how expensive it takes to build just 10 feet down the road of just about anything. So making sure that my project is realistic is something that's really important to me.
I think the biggest challenge is in all of these projects. I mean, I think I see the GIS presentations, I see the geodesign presentation. Of course, I also see my resident landscape architecture presentations, and to actually make sure that these projects are germane to those topics. They're not going too far and too wide. In the geodesign projects, we are using the geospatial technologies to solve a design problem. And for geodesign, it's a lot to do with identifying the existing processes and identifying a design that's going to shape those processes as impacts into something more favorable to the wishes of the community. In a very simple formula, that's a geodesign study. You have your, you know what your wishes are for the communities. You're from Rochester, Brittany was from Clifton, so just being local residents. Now you're only one representative, but you do know what some of the needs are more than we do, and so you're going after trying to solve some of these processes, some of these challenges that are there. And I know in Brittany, she talked about the pedestrian, having issues with pedestrian way. And by the way, Brittany, you showed an image of a pedestrian walkway with an accessible crosswalk. Probably want to show an image that shows more problems than there was at least some solution there. But in Miles, you're talking about the green infrastructure. You really, focus on the green infrastructure. I know we've been talking for a number of weeks here, but as I'm watching this in the context of other talks this week, if you talk about this presentation in the context of green infrastructure and talk about the green infrastructure, or basically the processes of Rochester, the natural processes of Rochester that have been interrupted by human behavior and human development, and how the green infrastructure is going to solve that, but where do you prioritize this along this long corridor? Now, the Federal Highway Administration doesn't like to give up territory most of the time, but they might. This may not be realistic completely, but your project is not the inner loop. Your project is a green infrastructure project. Inner loop is more of a development project. I don't see any green infrastructure in the inner loop. So you are different, and I think you just need to keep everything in context to what the geodesign process is or geodesign project is without going too far, because you only have so much time on this.
Mhm. Thank you.
Okay. Well,
There was, sorry, Miles, real quick. There's
Go ahead.
one question in the chat there for Greg. He said he couldn't unmute it.
oh, thanks for that, Dan.
From Greg, yeah.
In terms of network analysis, no, I haven't looked at a specific tool. I've done network analysis in my undergrad and early after I graduated at my first job, but it's been a few years, so no, I have to brush up with my network analysis tools in terms of looking at how to best use GIS in order to answer some of those questions.
Okay, well, thanks to all the presenters today. I will make this recording available in our capstone library. So I'll put the link to that here in the chat shortly, but thanks to everybody for joining us today. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you.